So hopefully we are live now, and we'll see, check some of these settings and see what's going on here. I hope we're live. I think we're probably sending out some signal, and there we go. We're about 20 seconds in now, so I'm glad that it finally caught up to us. Now, if you are just joining us, we're going to be talking about phasing out treats in your training. It's something that we absolutely want. So that we can not be dependent, not have to hold treats in our hand, not have to hold a bag of food or, whatever. So that's what we're going to be talking about in today's show. And we've actually got a couple of tricks that you can use. Also, we're going to help you be a little bit more aware of what you're doing when you're training your dog so that you don't accidentally make your dog dependent on these treats. And it's something that we see a fair amount. And, as a student over 10 years ago, when I came to McCann Dogs, I've made some of these mistakes. And as a professional dog trainer for the last 10 years, after I did my apprenticeship and became a trainer at McCann's, I see it often. I see some of these things happening often. And I understand how students in our YouTube audience can make these mistakes. They're pretty simple ones to make, but we're going to show you today how you can not make those mistakes, which is going to be really helpful. So I'm just going to make sure all our stuff is working here.
I feel like I don't normally see orange on that page.
Oh, no?
The last page.
Well, it's okay. We're running.
Okay.
Yeah, we're live. Kayl doesn't really know how to work all of this stuff.
I don't get it. I just
here.
Look at a camera and I talk when he tells me to.
I know. But there's a lot that goes on. There's a lot of balls in the air and things or buttons need to be pressed and stuff needs to happen. But something that we haven't done in a little while that I think we should absolutely do is our fun little train station bumper that I created. And the hardest part, if this is your first time joining us here, the hardest part of this was getting all the dogs to sit still. So, so enjoy while we do our train station bumper. Pretty impressive, right? I think that took me, honestly, probably about 4 minutes to put together. I could have probably taken a little bit more time to make that look really good, but I like it. And it's also seems appropriately themed because you have joined us here today at the train station. So I have my hat just off camera in case we need to use it, in case there's like a really challenging training scenario. Now today, it's been the last train station, I think we didn't have a chance to actually get into the training area, but today you can see we're going to get into the actual station part of the train station. And we're going to show you guys some tricks. We're going to offer some tips, some advice, and hopefully will help you to be less dependent on your food, because it can be a real challenge for some people, and a lot of people often feel like they have to have a bag of cookies or jingle a cookie jar or do something to have their dog's attention. We're going to show you how that doesn't have to be the case.
Yeah, I feel like people can go two ways. They either really want to use the food and then they have a hard time being able to do things when you take it away from them, or there's people that are so worried that the dogs are going to become dependent on food that they don't want to use food at all.
For sure.
So we're saying that you should do both.
Yes.
And that it needs to be done in moderation and in the correct way so that you can use it to teach something and then eventually only need it when you want a reward.
For sure. We need to welcome Angeline 80 to the live stream. Hello again. And PO32007 with a straightforward and we always welcome those. Anybody wants to drop choo-choo in the chat, and I will try to match it with our train whistle.
Whistle. What do I want to call it?
Train horn, I think.
Horn.
Yeah.
Horn.
It's a whistle. It's a train whistle. And an integral part of what we're doing here today.
Sounds a bit like a horn to me.
Does it? I guess I don't understand how. Who knows? What's important is the fact that it's the train station. Now, as we reach the wrap up of the pre-show, let's get right into this. We all want our dog to pay attention to us. We spend all this time and effort training them so that they'll listen. And, we use food a lot of the time for some of the exercises that we do. And it's a very powerful tool for training. However, with some of the little mistakes that we might make along the way, some people can become dependent on it, and a lot of dogs can become dependent on it. So that's why we're here today. We're going to talk about phasing out the food in your training, and by doing a few of these exercises and being really aware of some of the techniques that we're going to talk about, you can have a dog who is totally phased off treats and works on your verbal command. So with that said, I want to welcome you to the training station. I'm Ken Steepe.
I'm Kayl McCann.
Welcome back to McCann Dogs. So this episode of the train station deals with treat training. Now, let's talk a little bit about why we might use food in training. And whether it's puppy training, adult dog training, maybe it's, a trained dog, and we're using treats with them. Why might we use food in our training?
Well, we choose to use food in the McCann method because we like to start off with showing the dog what we're looking for them to do. So we often will use a method of shaping or method of luring in order to manipulate the food into certain positions and teach the dog to follow. We know from experience that, what dogs learn first, they learn best. So our goal is to initially, set them up so that they do it correctly. And usually the easiest way to do that is using something that they want. And a lot of dogs like food. And we spend a lot of time with our dogs as puppies teaching them to find food very valuable in the way that we feed them, in the way that we like how much food we give them, what their feeding schedule is like, all that kind of stuff. We basically prime them to feel that food is a resourceful and enjoying thing, so that we can then take something that we know the dog wants and then use it to teach them to listen to us.
Yeah, and that's important. I think even if you haven't primed the pump or you haven't prepared your dog to, you haven't done any extra steps for them to teach them to love food, it's a resource that a lot of dogs understand is valuable. Mm-hmm. So, even with those puppies who have never been meal fed before, which there's a difference between meal feeding and free feeding.
We probably should talk about that as well.
Yeah, and I will. Okay, that's a good idea. So we believe strongly in meal feeding. So that's, you put your puppy's meal down or your dog's meal down, and then they eat it, and then, when it's done or 10 minutes later or whatever the threshold criteria is, you take it up again.
Ours is about 60 seconds.
Yeah, with our 7 dogs. It doesn't take very long.
No.
There's also an element of competition there, I think. Mm-hmm. But in the instance when you're meal feeding a dog, the dog begins to understand that food is valuable. Whether they're, super hungry or not, they know that they should eat their dinner or eat their breakfast. And a lot of people struggle if they're free feeding their dog. Now, there's a lot of reasons why we don't believe in free feeding. I don't want to get down this path too far, but 2 big reasons are it's hard your dog will gain weight. They will become overweight. It's hard for a dog to moderate their diet. And the other one is it's hard to know when they're not eating correctly, or maybe their bowel movements are irregular. Something's changed in the GI tract that it's harder to catch those things. So meal feeding is really, really important. So when we talk about food being a really valuable resource, and a lot of puppies and dogs understanding why it's valuable naturally, that's why we like to use food in training. It's also, a great way to bring the dog into the right state of mind. And, it's a little bit less stimulating as like play or a tug or something, or a toy. Yeah.
Which are good things too. We're not against that, but
in the right place.
We just want to have lots of tools to use. There isn't just one thing, but today's focus is more about food.
For sure. Now, if you have had the challenge of, your dog, you feel like your dog's only listening when you have food, let us know in the chat, and we can see if we can troubleshoot some of these issues with you. Now, if you have an unrelated dog training question, drop that in the chat as well. We'll see if we can get to it along the course of this live stream. Now, what did you want to talk about in terms of luring and timing today? Because I know that's a pretty big topic when we talk about phasing out the food.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to luring with food and you're teaching your dog something new, often we can really start to, without even know it, become very dependent on the food for doing most of the work. And if you have a dog that's really food motivated, it can be very challenging to transfer from getting them to do something by following the food to getting them to do it when the food isn't present anymore. So we have we know dogs learn within 1 second. So when they do something correct or when they do something incorrect, we have within 1 second to tell them that particular information. And if the information is delivered too far after that, we can sometimes create a lot of gray area or a lot of confusion for the dog. So we want to try and be particular about that. So when it comes to using food, we try to be very aware that we're not preempting the dog by showing the dog the food very, very early in the stages and then giving a lot of the cues and stuff afterwards, because then a lot of dogs are so focused on the food that they're not always paying attention to what we're saying or what we're doing.
Yeah, so let's show these guys. Let's head over to the train station. And Kayl can show you exactly what she means. We have the little training area set up. And one of these guys can head over and do some, I think maybe beeline the puppy.
Well, she just pushed her way through. So
oh, did she? She leapt out of the out of her dog area. Just off camera, we have a little fence where the dogs hang out when we're doing these live streams, and then they can come out. And Beeline is pretty excited. And you're probably going to hear Funky Monkey. Hi, Miss B. You're going to hear Funky. Oh, look, there's B. You're going to hear Funky probably and Slam getting excited because they think it's their turn next. Because they'll sometimes do that. I'm going to turn on one of the other cameras or lights as well as I transfer over to the other camera. So there's Kayl. I'm going to, if you can move back just a little bit. You see yourself on the camera? That's perfect.
Okay, so when you're using food in your dog training and you're teaching your dog something new, so for example, I can use the example of like sit or stand. So she will go into a sit very easily. She doesn't maneuver into a stand on my word. She still follows a hand signal, so I think that's a good one to use. So basically, if I have the food on her nose, so let's just maybe go back a step. The meaning of luring, when we say that, is when I put food on the dog's nose and I simply move it around, teaching her to follow it. And I can use this method to teach all kinds of positions. So you can see she's following my hand really easily into different positions. That's what we call luring. And that's a great way to teach your dog new exercises. But what a lot of people end up doing is when they want to teach their dog to sit or to lie down or do any trick really, a lot of people end up giving the dog verbal commands while they're showing the dog the food. And my ultimate goal, sit, is that when I say sit or down, good girl, sit, yes, is that she is able to do it with just me saying the word without, again, me having to give her a hand signal, and especially without me having to show her a cookie. So if when I'm teaching her, I have the food on her nose while I'm giving her commands, she's probably not going to be listening too closely to what I'm saying because she's so distracted and enthralled with the food on her hand. So I'm going to show you the correct way to do it, and then I'm going to show you the incorrect way to do it so that you can see the difference. So the correct way, if I wanted to teach her to stand up on all 4 feet, I would have the food ready, but I would have it away from her nose so she can't see it or smell it. And I'm going to tell her, stand. Oops. Okay, so too much time has gone past. She didn't follow it very well, so I'm simply going to start again. Stand. Yeah. Oops. You suck. You suck, babe. Let's try that again. Stand. Yes, good girl. That was better. So I had to help her with my other hand under her belly. Okay, let's try that again. Sit. Wait. And I'm making her sit this way just for the camera purposes so you can see her a little bit more easily. But you don't certainly have to do that when you practice it. You're guessing. If you just wait a second, I will tell you. Wait. Good. Look. Stand. Yes, good girl. And then I can reward or I can lure 1 second later. Now what I don't want to do is this. Put the food on her nose and then tell her stand and do everything all at the same time. I picked a lousy dog to demonstrate with.
No, it's good to see her struggle with this.
Stand.
It's good.
Yes, good girl.
Now you can see Kayl's helping her to do right.
I was helping her with my hand, but I was still doing poor timing with my food. So as I said stand, I was still rewarding her. So if your dog's struggling with this, so what I really should do with B right now is I should stop saying the command because she doesn't really know what I want her to do physically. So the smart thing to do would be to practice getting her to follow my hand more easily into position and then go ahead and add the word after. And that's another sort of important dog training point that we like to stress. Yes, that's a good girl. Because I don't want to try to manipulate her into a position over and over and over again with her struggling and then have her have the opportunity to hear the command a bunch of times without actually going into position. So I'm just going to do that a couple times right now quickly. Yes, good girl. Okay, good girl. Sit. Good. Yes, good girl. Sit. Good. Sit. Good. Yes, good girl. Can you try one more? Sit. Good. Okay. Yes, good girl. So it's getting a little bit better now, so I'm going to go back to adding the proper timing. Sit. Sit. She's trying all these extra tricks. Just sit. It's the easy one. Stop with the paw. Good girl. Wait. You're funny. So I'm going to say the command, and then 1 second later, I'm going to give her the verbal. So this would be the correct way to teach your dog to do a behavior so that I can wean off the food later in life. Stand. Yes, good girl. So see how I clearly said the word, and then I showed her the food 1 second later. I'll do it one more time. Good girl. Wait. Stand. Yes, good girl. And then I can show her 1 second later. Now my goal is to practice and practice and practice and practice until I get to the point where when I say stand and I'm about to maneuver my hand out in front, my dog just starts to go automatically. And then I can work to the point where I don't need to use my hand signal or need to use the food at all. And then I can work from there. So she obviously would need many more sessions before I could show you that part of it. We work lots on sits and downs, but we don't work a lot on stands. So I have a little project to do with this. Did you want me to show anything else?
Yeah, good. No, let's we'll come back to this camera just for a second and just reiterate what Kayl was talking about, and she can see her kind of working in the background behind me.
Now it's bothering me that I need to work on it.
But it's good. I think it's good for these guys, and I'm sure they'll let us know in the chat to see B struggle through some of these things. If you want to put her away, I wonder if we should do like somebody like Funky with the down, work on the down or something like that, because she'd be a good dog to show it with. But to see Kayl work through some of these exercises, it's a great opportunity for you guys at home to understand, what are some troubleshooting methods. But the important takeaway that Kayl was showing was that it's always verbal, followed by the lure. Don't start unless you are luring, intentionally luring your dog just to get them moving around, just to try to create this shape or behavior. If you want your dog to listen to your voice, you need to lead with your voice. It needs to be that verbal, then followed by the stimulus, and then you can reward them. That's something that we post on our grade 1 haul, inside our grade 1 haul, is cue, stimulus, reward.
Yes.
As a reminder for people.
Yeah, and then the goal is to, I don't know what you were just saying, I wasn't really listening, I apologize, but okay. The goal is to eliminate the stimulus.
Yeah.
The goal is to be able to give a cue and then reward from there without having to stimulate them in the middle to do it, either with food or with whatever. The goal is to be able to get them to do it independently. Yeah,
so another thing that we see people struggle with, if they're using food to lure their dog or to reward, is the hand position. I see a couple of great questions coming in. We'll get right back to those after we talk about this. So having a similar hand position, whether you have food or not, is really important for your dog. Do you want to maybe we'll put B away and then you can get Funky out and we'll just do a few downs or something like that and show like how you'd start with how your hand would look. Yep. And then what we often see people do, because there's a common thing that students will do when their dog starts to have an understanding of the down command. They may have a great verbal timing, so the dog has been pretty responsive or learned to do their down pretty well, but they might not once the student doesn't have food in their hand and they're trying to wean off of food or lessen that food lure, that they struggle with this. And there's a common thing, but let's go back to the other camera, and Kayl can talk to us a little bit about the down signal.
Actually, I can show them because she understands this process for me to do it fast enough. If somebody wants to choose a short, one-syllable word, it doesn't even need to be one syllable, just a random word.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So somebody in the chat, give us a one word that we're going to use so that Kayl can do a better demonstration with Funky if it's a word she's never heard before. So a single syllable word will be really helpful, or something that's relatively short is always a good replacement for whatever that word is that she might be. Now, Funky and Kayl do all kinds of demonstrations probably once a month. Mm-hmm. She'll do for our grade 1 students, and so she's often getting like different behaviors for different words. Funky really understands the process of learning. So in these exercises, Funky has learned to offer behaviors, or Funky has learned to really precisely follow the food. So this will be a really good example or demonstration for you can hear Funky Monkey's pretty excited to start working. So Jess S says twirl.
Twirl.
Yeah, has she ever heard that word before?
I don't think so.
Okay, that's a great suggestion, Jess. So give that a shot.
Okay, so, and again, the idea behind this is that I want to eventually be able to not have to use food, and then our ultimate goal with our training is to be able to get our dogs to be able to listen so well that we can just use verbal commands. We don't necessarily have to use hand signals. However, hand signals are great too, but they tend to be a lot easier for dogs to respond to. And if your dog is at a distance or they can't see you or whatever, you know, having a verbal command can be a little bit more convenient for you, but it's much harder for the dogs to understand it. So this method is both to help to wean off of the food and then also to wean off of the actual hand signal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the word twirl to Funky, and I'm going to teach her to lie down on the command twirl. So right now she knows to lie down on the word down. So I'm going to make the process a little faster by doing it with a behavior that she already understands how to do. But I'm going to completely change the word on her and make her problem solve it. So I'm going to say twirl, and then 1 second later after I say the command, I'm going to motion her or lure her into the down position, therefore associating the word twirl with that particular behavior. So I have several pieces of food ready. Just going to get her into position. Twirl. Yes. So I said the word, I motioned towards the floor, and then she was lying down. Okay. Try again. Sit. Twirl. Yes. Good girl. Okay. Go sit. Wait. Good. Twirl. Yes. Good girl. Okay. Girl, sit. Good. Sit. Yes. Good. Sit. Yes. Sit. Good. Twirl. Yes. Good girl. Okay. One more. Good. Sit. Yes. Twirl. Yes, good girl. Okay, so when you do this with your dog, though, I would suggest doing a lot more reps than what I just did. I'm cheating the system a little bit here and doing it faster because I have a dog that understands the problem-solving steps quite thoroughly. She's 10 years old and she's been around the block a few times, haven't you? Yes, he's a good girlie. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to say the new command, and I want her to move into position when I say the command to her. And if she does, I'm going to give her what we call a jackpot reward, which we're going to talk a little bit more in a moment. So I'm just going to get my food ready here. Twirl. Yes, good girl. Very nice. So she figured that out really quickly. I better try it again to make sure it wasn't a test. Get back up. Back up. Sit. Can you see her?
Not really.
Okay, come here. Sit. Back up. Sit. Can you see her now? You're guessing. Sit, and I will tell you. Wait. Twirl. Yes! Good girl. A little bit creepy, but that was pretty good.
Okay,
Yes.
so you talked about timing. Let's talk about hand position, how your hand looks as you're phasing out food. If you know, most people won't have that success with their dog as quickly because Funky's really learned how to learn. But talk about how you present your hand with no food.
Yeah, this is important, and actually this came up in our classes this week because this week's step in part of our training for several of the exercises is to transition to doing the signal with food in her hand to doing the same behavior without food in her hand. And what we find sometimes starts to happen is the dog starts to recognize a certain body posture or a certain hand signal when you have food in your hand, and then when the food's removed, sometimes people forget sort of exactly what they were doing, and they start to change the look of the exercise. So for example, if I'm trying to get her to sit, and if I have food in my hand, I happen to hold my hand, you know, with my hand pitched like this, sit, and then I am showing her the food. Okay, lie down for a second. And then all of a sudden I say sit, and I point my finger at her and I go sit, sit, sit. Why isn't she doing it? But again, if I say sit, and I do the same hand signal I did when I taught her, she's going to be able to understand the difference. So I don't want to go changing the picture on her because dogs are super smart and they look at all these little tiny details. And it's really, really important that you're mimicking the same type of body posture and very important hand signal, whether you have food or whether you don't have food. So if you don't want to have to hold your food like this, like for me, when I teach a down signal, I actually take my flat hand and I put my food between my fingers so my hand can be sort of a flat palm down, and then I motion to 2 dogs behind the fence just lie down when I sit down. I just motion toward the floor that way so that when my hand does not have any food in it anymore, my hand can be more open, which is a more comfortable way for me to move my hand. The great thing about dogs, though, is that you don't have to do anything, you know, exactly the same as everybody else. You just need to pick something and you need to be consistent with it. That's the most important thing for the dog, because they're watching you like a hawk and they're trying to figure out what cue or what body, you know, mannerism they can pick up on in order to understand what you're looking for.
Yeah, really good, really important. Okay, let's head back over to this first camera again.
So cute.
And I'll bring us back over.
Okay.
You know, whether you are working on your down, working on your sit, whatever it is, so often do we see people, the moment you take food away, they close their hand and they're starting to point and they think they're helping their dog. But you've really presented a completely different picture for them. And that's something that people often struggle with. Now let's jump into the chat for a second and see what these guys are saying.
Maybe this one?
Sure. I just hit send. So Brian Benson says, my dog listens way better with food than without. I can get him to do almost anything with food. He's a huge foodie yellow lab. Toys don't always
Labs
work
love food.
as a substitute with him. Now, be aware that I am also a lab lover and lab owner. The first dog that I trained in family obedience was a black lab. And I know that dogs, especially labs, are super food motivated, but I will tell you that that is such a valuable thing to know about your dog when you're working. Now, Brian, I don't know, you had mentioned that question maybe a little bit earlier in the chat before we had a chance to do a demonstration. So some of those skills are going to be really helpful for you. Be really self-aware. It's going to be very, very helpful.
I think just the last point, it says toys don't work as a substitute with him. We won't get too off topic, but we do have a couple of videos on toys and how to teach a dog to be more motivated and interested in them. And if your dog truly loves food so much, you actually can use that to transfer the value of food over to a toy with a few different training techniques. So you could maybe use that to your advantage.
For sure.
The other thing that might think about, and this is good for everybody to hear, not just Brian, is that, you know, when you have food, you can start to teach your dog to do behaviors even when you're not using it, you know, right in front of their face. So last week or a couple weeks ago, we talked a little bit about an exercise that it's called a rule out, or you decide, where we have the food present, but we teach the dog to sort of pull themselves away from it and to choose not to be so distracted by it in order to earn it. So an exercise like that also might be very valuable for your dog to understand, to be less enthralled with the food, but still use it to your advantage.
Now, if you're watching this on the replay, I'll try to post a card at this point. I don't know what time we're at, but I'll try to post a card at this point if for you guys that are watching live.
7:26.
Check it out in the description below when I get a chance to update when this thing processes and goes live. But there's a couple of exercises where it really teaches your dog some emotional control, and it's really, really helpful. It's a helpful skill to have.
So Angeline says, I don't free feed, but I still have 2 out of 6 dogs that are overweight, so I've dropped their food a little at a time. Is this the correct way until I get them to a good weight? Yes, definitely meal feeding. Dogs that are free fed often are very overweight, but dogs that are meal fed are often overweight as well. I think overweight dogs is a pretty big issue among a lot of pet dogs. So you do want to be aware of how much you're feeding at a time. And if you are going to reduce food, it is obviously healthier to do it a little bit at a time. I do this crazy check probably every day or every other day with my dogs. We call it the rib check. So I just run my hands down the side of my dog's bodies every single day and make sure that I can easily feel ribs underneath their fur. So if I have to dig my fingers in order to feel ribs at all, then my dogs are carrying too much weight. So I'm not really the type of person that follows the instructions on the back of the bag, because sometimes those can be a little bit misleading. So the best thing to do is to figure out what the appropriate weight for your dog should be, not really what they are right now, and then work very gradually towards that. And again, if you're having any weight issues with your dogs, not only should you be watching the food, but you also need to be aware of the exercise that they're getting as well, because that can be a big help in weight losses too.
I want to say hello to Remy the Rescue, and Remy the Rescue asks, what kind of dog is that, and is that Funky Monkey? That was Funky Monkey that you saw, and Funky Monkey is a mixed breed. She's like a border collie cross.
Terrier.
Yeah, there's a really important question that we need to answer here from G. Marshall. So G. Marshall says, I was never a big believer in giving my puppy treats to behave. I found 1, he would not behave until he got a treat, and 2, just too many treats for a dog. Now, I am not a big believer in giving puppy treats to behave. What we really want you to do is rewarding your dog for making good choices, setting them up to make good choices. The McCann method is all about it's a choice-based system. We really want to set our dogs up to be right, and then we want to pay out. It's like if someone were to work and at the end of the 8-hour day, then they get paid, or at the end of the 2 weeks they get paid. It's better to be rewarding your dog for making those things, making a decision and making the right one, marking that moment, then giving them the food. That's all. When you're thinking about dog training, be really clear about that. Be really clear that there is a process. Your dog chooses, they make the right choice, and they can be rewarded for that. If not, then you show them how to be right, and then you can reward them for choosing to remain in that position, or whatever the thing is.
I'm going to back chain a little bit though. It is important though that when you're teaching your dog something brand new, that you shouldn't be afraid to use food at that moment.
For sure.
If it's something that your dog's never seen before, or they are confused about, or they don't understand, we do believe using food in those situations, or any type of encouraging item. It could be your hands, it could be a toy, it could be whatever. We do that to teach the behavior initially, and to teach the dog how to do the behavior, but also to like what they're doing, to build motivation for work, to really, really want to do that. And once we feel that the dog grasps the understanding, we then take the lure and turn it into a reward, like what Ken just explained. So it's not a bribe, it's now a reward. So we don't say, here's the food, please listen to me. We then move into a phase where I'm going to ask you to do the behavior, and when you listen, I will reward you. So it's very, very different than having them behave because you're having a treat
treats.
Present.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we
want to talk about. And I think that's where a lot of people make mistakes.
Yeah.
I think they say, oh, they're not listening, and then they pull the food out, and the dog says, haha, I have you trained really well.
Right.
And they have their owners wrapped around their little fingers to just pull food out all the time to make them listen. And we don't want that to happen.
No, and it's so often people feel like that's what they've got to do. And for example, if we've shown a dog how to sit or whatever, sit in at your side, and we've rewarded them for that, and we know that they have a clear understanding of what they're doing because they've been rewarded lots for being there, but they happen to get up because they get really excited. We're going to place them back in position, give them a few seconds to think, to really acknowledge or remain in that position, to acknowledge that position, and then we're going to start rewarding them again. So, we are really guiding them. It's all about choice. And once your puppy is learning to choose the right things and you're there to give them the information, that's how you can quickly move from a treats in your hand, on-leash situation, to a leash dragging situation, to a verbal control situation. It's about timing, and it's about giving your puppy the skills to make the great choices. And that's exactly what we believe in. And Kayl mentioned it briefly, but our focus is motivation. Our focus is that the dog is, thinking, listening, enjoying it. Yeah. So it's so important.
Yes. We don't want to be using bribes, and we don't want to be using force.
Yeah.
We want to be setting the dog up to, have a high possibility that they're going to do it correctly, because we've just shown them a whole bunch of times in a really fun and exciting way. And then it's like taking the training wheels off a little bit, and then seeing if the dog can kind of figure out the behavior. And if the dog doesn't understand, then we help them out, either whether placement, or maybe I might look at the situation and say, you know what, you don't have a clue what I mean yet. You're still really confused. I'm going to go back to showing you and spending a little bit more time on the foundation portion of the training, and then go from there.
Showing them how to be right. It's like a dance instructor. I'm a terrible dancer.
He really is.
Oh, thanks. But they'll guide you around. They'll show you. Your puppy gets up because they're really excited. You place them back in that sitting position. You put some slack back in the leash. they acknowledge that, you can reward them. You can start by praising them, then you can reward them. So Gary G. Marshall, you brought up a really important point. I'm glad you did. Carla Martinez, I know Carla has posted a couple of questions on our other videos. Welcome to the train station. I'm glad you could join us. Now, let's talk a little bit about walking on leash. Now, this is something Kayl showed us a little bit with the down signal, how you need to be really aware of what you're doing with your hand. The exact same thing applies to walking on a loose leash. And a lot of people struggle because they aren't self-aware enough. We posted a video a long time ago about how helpful it can be to videotape your training sessions. Just every phone has a camera in it. If you just videotape your training, you'll start to pick out some of the things that you're doing, and it'll help you troubleshoot some of those puppy problems. But be really aware. If you're walking in a perfect heel position with, maybe your treat pouch is on your one side and you're walking with your leash maybe, resting on your chest or whatever, and your dog is behaving beautifully, and then you decide you're going to go for a walk and, you wave to the neighbors and things are changing, you're
on your phone.
You're on your phone, whatever the thing is, which I hate, by the way, but whatever that thing is, you're presenting your dog a different picture. So loosen up in training, be accurate, but also be real, look like you're going for a walk with your dog. It's not perfect heel position. You're not going to march down the street, and hopefully you don't march like this. Otherwise you probably have some real back issues, I would think. But, be aware of it. Be aware of what you're doing as you're going through your training. Now, Angeline 80 mentioned something that I think we should go back to just for a second, because I think it's good for overall dog training. Angeline says, and I know this is talking about showing off some of the things that Beeline was doing, but that's what drives me crazy about watching how to teach a new dog trick, because we don't get to see what the dog is doing when they're struggling with it. Now, as a dog trainer, it's really important to understand, especially with trick training, because it's fun and you and your dog should be enjoying it, and it's about the problem solving process. So with trick training, if you reach a point where your dog's struggling, then it's important to take a step back and reach a point, or help them a little bit to reach a point where they can be successful again. I actually think that she's
referring to when I was doing it with Beeline, and Beeline was
right.
messing up.
Yes, exactly.
She's talking about.
Yeah, for sure. So, but the same thing, Kayl took a step back and she just did some luring exercises. So, it's about looking at the big
picture. I agree, though, not enough people show the problem solving part of teaching.
Yeah, for sure. But arm yourself with that knowledge, is that if you reach a point where you're struggling, that might mean you need to take a step back and make it just a little bit easier, so that maybe you've progressed too fast, maybe you've increased the level of distraction or whatever the thing is, but keep that in mind.
This is good because I think it sort of brings us to our next topic.
Okay.
Miranda Malone says, my dog, did I do it properly?
Yes, yeah.
My dog knows that I keep her treats in my pocket, and she also always nudges and puts her nose up to my pocket. How should I address this behavior?
Right.
Lots of dogs do that. They're very wise to the situation often. So you do want to discourage that, because you don't want the dog sort of being rude and sort of demanding that they get the food right away. But one of the little games that we like to play with our dogs is called the jackpot. And what we'll do is we will take several piles of treats, and we will hide them in different locations in the area that we're training. So if I was training in here, for example, I might put some on the top of the crate, some on the windowsill, some on a chair off to the side. I would put them in lots of different locations, and then I would have my puppy on leash so that they can't go and steal the food, but I would first off ask my dog to do a behavior, but I wouldn't have any food on my body when I did this. So the food's all in my little special locations. I would have no food on my body, and I would ask my dog to do a behavior, and I would choose something that I knew my dog understood very well and that was quite happy to do. So it might be a trick. It might be as simple as calling their name or asking them to sit. And then from there, I would say yes to mark that they were correct, and then I would yell jackpot, and then we would run to one of the locations where the treats are, and I would give my dog several rewards from that little pile, and then I would return back to the middle of the room and ask my dog for a different behavior, or I might work up to asking my dog for one or two behaviors in a row, and then I might run to a different spot where I've left a different pile of treats and get the rewards. And we find that this game is really fun because the dog learns, if I listen in the middle, I listen to you while there's no food there, we're going to run and we're going to get a reward. So we use this a lot in our agility agility training, because in agility you're not allowed to take food or toys into the course with you. Your dog has to be able to perform all of that, and they're not allowed to get the reward until they're outside of the ring. So this is a technique that we use for that. But we'll also use it, if you have a cookie jar by the door and you call your dog inside, they have to listen to the come command when they're in their backyard. When they come in, ask them to sit, and then you could choose to give them their reward. Their jackpot just happens to be in a jar on the counter. So the method can be used in lots of different variations, but it's a really fun game to play with the dogs. You just have to start off easy and then make it harder and harder from there.
And keep in mind with that example Kayl talked about with the recall, that it's not like, shake the cookie bag, come.
Yeah.
That's not the order. Make sure
that's cheating.
Yeah, for sure. So you're rewarding your dog for making good choices once you know that they know. Once you've put in the effort, you've done some training with them, and you know that they understand, then you can start to reward them. And that brings us a little bit away from jackpot rewarding, but brings us to random rewarding. Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit about how you can use random rewarding to keep that motivation level high for your dog.
Yeah, so random rewarding is when we start to reward with less predictability. So, often what happens is we end up using a lot of rewards in the beginning stages of our training when we're luring, and I can use walking as an example. This is a great one for this. So if I'm, teaching my dog to walk at my side initially, I might start off by having lots of food in my hand and feeding like every 1, 2, 3 steps, rewarding the dog from there. But
I'm just going to stop you just for a moment. Carla Martinez mentioned something that's perfect, and I think it speaks to this, and I think it would be good if everyone were sort of on the same page here, because her question leads us into exactly what you're saying. She says,
okay,
I've heard that when we front load a clicker or marker word, we're basically promising the upcoming reward. When we mark and don't deliver a reward, does it diminish the importance of the marker? And this is where random rewards comes in. It's perfect. Yeah, well timed, Carla. Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's great. Yes and no. So, a dog like Funky, for example, and she's maybe a bit extreme, but she's 10 years old. The amount of times that she has heard the word yes, which is my marker word. She also knows a clicker, but I tend to do a lot of stuff with my voice, yes, because I have it on me all the time. But she has had probably millions of repetitions of hearing the word yes and then being rewarded 1 second later. So internally, she feels joy and reward feelings when she hears the word yes, because she's had so many repetitions of hearing it. So the actual word yes has almost become a reward in itself.
Right.
Now, do I still reinforce her with food sometimes? Absolutely. Now, if you have a young dog, though, or a new dog that you're training, you don't want to go to that phase too quickly. You should make sure that if you use the word yes, that you're going to follow up with a reward. And, this is something that can get better over time. But what is also important to know, so like with the jackpot thing or with this walking thing, is that the most important thing is that I say yes or I click at the correct time. So at the correct moment that the dog is doing the behavior that I want, that's when I need to mark it with my yes or my click. Early on in the stages, I do want to get a reward out as quickly as I can before I completely lose the behavior. But eventually, as you start to get a little bit more experience with your dog, as long as the word yes happens at the proper time, it's okay if the reinforcement that you're going to give them for the word yes is a little bit afterwards, because the dog already starts to feel an eternal joy for the word yes. And a great way to test this is, when you're training with your dog and you say the word yes to them, what do they do? How do they react? When I say the word yes to my dogs, I get eyes open, ears up, like face comes up to me, like mouth gets tight. It's like, oh my gosh, you're going to give me food. Like their reaction and how they respond to the word yes is completely different than if I was to say like some random word that they've never heard before. I can see that there's a response there to the word yes when I say it. Mm-hmm. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, really good. And it also speaks a little bit to occasionally mixing it up. Sometimes you're going to be using X treat. Maybe it's one of our the best homemade dog training treats from our YouTube channel, or maybe it's a tug toy. Maybe it's an exercise that your recall, for example. You need to keep your training fun. whether it's fun for you or fun for your dog, both are really important. So, occasionally you may randomly pull out a toy and play with your dog if it's an exercise that you want them like super stimulated, really exciting and fun. Now, you aren't going to use your tug toy specifically for your stay, especially if you have a dog who has a case of the wiggle bums and struggles with their stay. But for some of those exercises, you can treat it like a jackpot reward, like Kayl does with our agility students in the agility training facility. You can pre-place it somewhere and you can go have that game of tug with them.
I want to go back to random rewarding before you change the subject.
Yes,
because we sort of started talking about it and then we stopped.
Okay.
So for the random rewarding, so starting to go from rewarding a lot to rewarding less or rewarding more randomly. I was using walking as an example before. I think this is a good exercise to sort of make this clear. So initially I would be using a lot of food in my left hand, and I would be rewarding, and it's in my left hand because my dog would be on my left side. I would be rewarding very, very often as I'm moving along. And then what I would try to do is go from having the food very close to their nose to maybe holding the food at my waist level and then dropping my hand to reward, to discourage any jumping that I might be getting, and then to reward the dog in position. But all while I'm doing this, I am watching my dog very, very intensely to make sure that when I say the word yes, it's for a moment that I like. So the dog should be in position at my side. All four paws should be on the floor and not airborne. And I want them, relatively paying attention to me. They don't need to be staring at me with like rapt attention, but they do need to be like checking in with me and just being aware. I certainly want to be, saying yes and giving my dog a treat when their nose is plastered to the floor, or they're like, totally thinking about like the dog that's walking nearby them or whatever. I do want to get some engagement. Once I'm able to get to the point where I can have the food up sort of at my waist level and I can drop it, then we would phase out to having the food out of your hands and like in a bait pouch, for example, that would be easy to get at. And then again, you can start to reward more randomly rather than quite so often. And then from there, you could phase off the bait pouch and blah, 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 blah. You would just keep going from there. But you do what some people make the mistake of is they use a lot of food and then all of a sudden they just get rid of the food, completely, and they expect the dog to be able to do a perfect job, and unfortunately it just doesn't work that way. You have to wean off of some of these things very gradually but also appropriately so that you're not teaching the dog to be dependent on it.
And as you were talking there, I thought about something that we haven't talked about yet that is really important. You guys are getting some you're getting a lot of information. I hope you've got your notepads out and you're taking notes, because
this is a lot about dog training.
Yeah, this is about training. Like, we're getting deep with you guys. So I'm glad you have joined
Melissa.
us.
Hi, Madison.
I'm glad you have joined us in this train station. And every time I say it, another opportunity to blow the train whistle. But
your train whistle blowing is getting weaker and weaker.
I know. I'm getting tired. Be sure you're using your voice. Your voice is the thing that can bridge the gap and maintain some attention and some focus from your dog in between those rewards. Now, something we see people often do is they're so focused on trying to get their dog to do some behavior that their mind is racing. They're thinking, is it going well? And is it going right? And, what if I do this? And what if he does that? But they're forgetting to communicate with their dog using the one tool that they always have with them. So using your voice to, start to wean off of some of those treats is a very, very helpful thing.
Yeah, people typically, for the lack of a better word, are pretty boring when they train their dog.
Right.
And I think it's because they don't really realize like how much attitude and focus and excitement and energy you can get from your dog by simply giving it out when you're teaching. I know I have a lot of students that like hate when I'm in a class with my dog. I'm not an instructor. I'm like an actual student in the class. Yeah. Because the other dogs in the class get so distracted by me because I'm so loud,
exciting and bubbly
and woohoo, yes, good girl. Like,
right.
I'm just sort of maybe a little bit obnoxious, but my dogs respond so well to it because, I'm keeping them animated, and then they end up, watching me a lot when I'm training, and they also end up doing the behaviors really quickly. So when I ask them to sit or get in or lie down or come, they do all of those behaviors really quick, really fast with a lot of attitude because I'm energetic in the way that I respond. And a lot of the time, because I really work hard on being engaging, I can even get some students' dogs to listen to me when the student's holding food.
Right.
The student will have food in their hand and I'll say, yeah, woohoo, and I'll play with the dog, and the dog's like, get ready with you and the food, you're boring. Look at all that noise she's making, that's fun. And then I can get them engaged from there. So you got to be a little vulnerable when you're training your dog, and like let your hair down, which is sometimes harder for like the guys than the girls, I find.
Yeah, it's especially hard for guys.
Yeah.
And whatever, I mean, for whatever reason.
You're good at it though.
Well, I've become way better at it than I was. I'm sure I was just as quiet
I used to
and
make
just as
fun of
self-conscious.
Ken for your clap and slap that used to do jitterbug.
With jitterbug at flyball racing,
Yeah.
yeah. It's hard, and it's something that, you know, we have lots of students that come through the program, guys and girls, and you know, guys for whatever reason seem to be they just expect the dog to listen too much. They're not ready to like. You know, be a little bit outgoing and be a little bit gregarious, I think is the word, and to be silly sometimes. And that can be really helpful. That can, you know, change. Again, we're talking about motivation and motivating your dog. That keeps it fun for your dog. But keep in mind that verbal, to bridge the gap as you're trying to, you know, eliminate food from your training, that verbal is a very, very useful thing. And it's a very powerful tool that I want you to take advantage of. Because it's going to help you, you know, reduce the amount of treats that you're using. Really fade out the lures. What else do you want to talk about? Oh, sometimes when you're using food in your training, the food itself can become a distraction. It can really create a much greater challenge than your dog is ready for or than you need. So you need to be aware of that as well. And Kayl and I were talking about this before the live stream, and we talked about the stay exercise and how often a student will struggle accidentally because they're trying to help their dog be right, but they're actually making it much more difficult for their poor dog. So talk about that just a little bit, about how the student might, you know, accidentally create a greater challenge for their pups.
Yeah, I sort of noticed it this week in our classes because, again, we're sort of halfway through the program, one of the programs that we're teaching. And so we're at the point now where we've introduced a lot of the exercises, and now we're trying to phase out of the food. And one of the things that we're doing on our sit stay is we're teaching the students how to build distance from their stay. So they're able to tell their dog to sit and stay, and then actually be able to walk right away and have the dog stay put. And I had several students this week try to ask their dog to stay, and they would have a whole hand of food. They would say stay, and as their hand was out in front of the dog, they would back away, and then the dog would just follow them, and then the student would get frustrated with the dog. And the dog has had so many repetitions of seeing food in a person's hand and then being, they're supposed to follow it, that the poor little dogs were just confused. So we recommend when you're teaching something, where you're building distance or whatever, to keep the food actually hidden away and to practice the behavior, especially for something like stay, where I might tell the dog to stay without any food, and I might move away for literally a moment, like a half a second, and then move back in and then present the food at that moment when I'm toe to toe, so that the dog's not going to get up and meet me halfway. And then I might remind the dog to stay and then get a little bit further away and then come back to the dog and then reward from there. Just to keep that sitting in position, a more valuable place to be. But that is definitely one of the exercises where holding the food in the hand is not helpful. It's actually hurtful.
Yeah, for sure. And in our My Dog Can program, in our in-class training, there are specific progressions. Your dog, once they have a solid understanding of what they need to be doing, whether it's being lured for walking or rewarded for walking, or randomly rewarded for walking, there comes a point where you need to start eliminating that food. And the longer you continue to use food when your dog already has a clear understanding, the greater the likelihood that you're going to struggle with it. So reach that point, proof them to some degree, have them make sure that they do understand, and then start to lessen that food, because it really expedites the process. I think Melissa had a good question here. I think as adults, we tend to not want attention to be put on us for being animated, even with our dogs. And I can totally appreciate that, especially like when you're in a public place or whatever it is. But here's what I'll say, Melissa, especially as a guy, once I started to not care about what other people thought, who was around, I started to have a better connection with my dogs, with the dogs that I wanted to not worry as much about those distractions. And I really came to terms with the idea that this 10 seconds of embarrassment. And people love seeing you train your dog. People want to help you train your dog. So we've talked about that in previous live streams. But, you know, it's worth it. It's worth that, you know, whatever, 2, 3, 4 weeks, whatever the training period is when you're out there and you're feeling goofy and doing these silly things with your dog, because it's going to pay off down the road. It's really going to help your dog to understand your focus must be on them, and try to do your best to not worry about how you look and how you feel and how you think, because, you know, it's people probably aren't looking at it in a negative way. People love to see people working with their dogs. It's just such an amazing thing. It's certainly something I like to watch.
Yeah.
I like to watch people having fun with their dog, doing something. And our agility training classes, Kayl, and you guys have joined us.
We have like a don't be boring policy.
Yeah.
If you're boring in agility, we'll call you on it right away, and we'll like come up and tickle you or do something, something that breaks the ice to like make you realize that like it's just not about being serious. It's about having as much fun as possible.
Yeah, because being motivating is key. Now, if you find that you're struggling because your dog is just so stimulated by the food, we've got a couple of tips for you now. Again, we talked a little bit about food value. Now, when you're starting to train your dog or puppy, you need to have a really clear understanding of what maybe their top 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 things are that they love. And you're going to pull out the big guns. You're going to pull out their favorite when they are struggling or when you think the challenge is high. But if you find your dog is too high, like we know some dogs that struggled because they just loved food so much. And that would be an opportunity for you to reduce the value. Bring up the stuff that's not quite as exciting. If you find your dog is, always jumping up at your side when you're going to reward them, or whatever the thing is, if you find that you're struggling, you think it's because they love the food too much, then pick a less exciting food. It's going to be really helpful for you. And the other thing that we see people do is sort of like bring the treat in really slowly, or bring the treat in too high for a down stay, or, you know, when their dog's in the down position, you want to get it to them quickly to avoid
that
the
almost
risk.
like teases them.
Yeah,
when you move it really, really slow.
It's a great test when the dog understands the behavior.
And then on top of that too, last week we put out a leave it video where we were teaching the dogs to, you know, leave things. And at the very beginning of the video, I did a little game we call You Decide, where we teach the dog to have more self-impulse around food. So if
self-control.
you do self-control, self-impulse. So if you find that your dog is too crazy around the food, that is definitely an exercise that I would recommend you do with your dog, because it makes a big difference
for sure
on their dog's ability to see food and not like react so crazy.
Yeah. And I know someone had mentioned earlier in the chat, and I don't remember who it was, that they had a lab, and that was a really
David Benson or Brian
Benson. Yeah. That was a really helpful thing for Deegan, is her having a little better understanding about, you know, that she has to sort of maintain her composure when we're using food. The other exercise we worked on a lot is the don't bite your hands thing. So if you have a dog that's super intense about food, you need to do some work. And we've posted those videos. And actually, I may have linked them in the card above. You guys can let me know if you post up here. There's a card somewhere above us that definitely shows our Leave It video that we posted on Monday, that you can check out. And I also I believe I posted the one for not nipping the hands, because I think they're both really helpful skills for you to have. Melissa says, I'm trying to do that 10 seconds of embarrassment in class. I can see the difference in Stormy when I do that. Yeah, it really makes a big difference. And especially when you're in classes, you know, there's other dogs around, there's other people around. We often, I see a little piece of dog hair floating away. I don't know if you guys could see that. And I captured it like a ninja. Did I look like I was squeezing Kayl's nose? Boop, boop. We see that in our classes when we're doing like a demonstration of, maybe the recall or something, and we're really loud and exciting, and all of the dogs in the room are like, okay, we're coming. You know, it's really helpful. Let's see. What's Carla asked here? So portioning out some of their daily kibble can help. It won't be as exciting as other treats, even low value ones. Yeah, exactly. Those are the kinds of things that you really want to know. But maybe you have a dog who just loves food and isn't that interested in cheese, or loves kibble and isn't that interested in cheese. You need to really quantify that. And I'd write it down. I'd make a little note about it so that you know in future training sessions that your dog loves one thing more than another. Alba 4 SE says, how long of a time would you recommend training my dog? Every day, 20 minutes. So this is
a great question.
Yeah, this is something that Kayl and I have talked about. We actually posted a video about it, and it's really important. And do you want to jump in here with
Sure. Like right now?
Yeah.
It looked like you were going to continue talking.
No, yeah, you can go. Go ahead.
So the best way to train a dog is to practice multiple times a day for very short periods of time. Because, when you're dog training, it's more of like a lifestyle change. It's not like, you certainly want to take your dog out and work on certain exercises with them, especially if you're training specific skills. But when you're not training specific skills, the management of the dog is equally as important, because you don't want to, have treats in your hand and make them listen for 20 minutes and then for the rest of the day let them, do what they want and be ill behaved. So, multiple times a day for short periods of time. And I find the best time to train a dog, especially when we have young dogs, we try to work our training sessions into like our everyday normal interaction with the dog. So, if we let the dog out for a pee break in the morning, we might work a bit of control at the door. We might send the dog out for a pee and then practice a recall or do like a couple down signals or that type of thing and bring them in. If I'm waiting for my tea to be ready, I might have the dog sit and do some look at me or some response to name or just a few little things here and there. It might take me 2 minutes. And then I might sit and have my breakfast. And while having my breakfast, what's my dog doing? They're in a crate so that I am not having to pay attention to them and multitask, or maybe I'm working on teaching the dog to lay quietly at my side, or maybe I'm getting them to do a couple tricks or whatever it might be. So we're just either always doing stuff with them, or we're teaching them how to just chill out, because that's a trick too. One of the best tricks there is, actually.
Yes, absolutely.
So it's it's not a quick answer. It's just little bits of time all day.
Yeah.
And then when you need a break, just throw them in the crate and let them have a little chill, let them have a little nap, give them a little bone to chew on while they're in there, let them have like their own little place to kind of, it's like they're having their bedroom. They can just go chill out and then bring them back out for some more fun. Yeah,
and this brings us full circle to talk about the motivation. You keep it fun, keep it exciting for your puppy, for your dog. It's got to be fun for you. So if you think, oh, geez, it's 6:30, every day at 6:30 I go out and I do 45 minutes of training, it doesn't really work that way. Your puppy needs to know that the rules apply all the time, and it's fun to do different exercises in different places. And it's the kind of thing, and this is something we definitely noticed in New York City, a lot of those dogs were very comfortable with loud noises, lots of people, some atypical things that you wouldn't normally experience, like fire trucks racing by all the time. And often the dogs there wouldn't bat an eye because it's something that they've seen before. So when you're talking about practicing with your puppy or your young dog, do it multiple times a day. Do it, in the living room, in the kitchen, maybe out in the backyard. Change it up a little bit as you're working on some of these things, because ultimately it'll really pay off in the end. Now, we have reached the end of our live stream. I think this is full of lots of tips and tricks. I hope you guys.
This is a good one.
Yeah, I hope you guys aren't overfull. Oh man, there's just so much information. Maybe we'll suggest that people bring a notepad or something for next time. And
the nice thing is you can watch it again.
It's a good point. Yeah. Once it's done processing, you can hit that replay button and check it out again if there's anything you missed. Now, if this is your first time on our channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We publish new videos every single week to help you to have a well-behaved four-legged family member, and we want you to get out and do something fun with your dog. We spend a lot of time with our dogs, and knowing that they're going to come when called, listen, walk on a loose leash, be able to be around lots of people and dogs is an empowering thing. So make sure you're spending time with your dog working on some of these exercises. So on that note, I hope you guys have had a good live stream. We hope you've learned something, and we will see you very soon. I'm Ken.
I'm Kayl.
Happy training, guys. Bye for now.
See ya.